Entitled Aunt Karen demands to live in my new house and won't take no for an answer. I teach her a lesson with updates. Posted by HuggyBear21. At the time, I had just purchased my first house, but told no one about it. I wasn't even dating at this time. It was a huge 3-bedroom townhouse well outside of the nearest city, and it came with 10 acres of land. Somehow, word had gotten around that I had just bought a house. I hadn't even moved in at this point. It wasn't long before my entitled Aunt Karen found this out and apparently made plans to move in and live there, despite the fact that I hadn't even moved in yet. It wasn't long before I got a call from her. First thing out of her mouth on this call was, not so much as a hello first, make sure I have a key when I arrive and move in. I'm like, excuse me, move in? Yes, I'm gonna live there and I'll allow you to live there too, as long as you don't cause issues and get loud. I told her, no, you're not moving into my house and will be thrown out if you try. I'm packing my stuff now, she said, as if my word was meaningless, and I'll be there first thing tomorrow, and you had better have my key in hand then, and then she hung up. As a result, I called the cops, who put me in touch with the local sheriff's department, and I explained what was going on, so they told me they would have a patrol check the property from time to time and run off anyone that was not supposed to be there and would arrest those that refused to leave. As it turns out, my entitled aunt tried to go to the property that night and drop some of her stuff off, but she was caught by the patrol and they told her to leave. When she said it was her house, they told her no, it wasn't, and the owner does not want anyone on his property, having to threaten to arrest her if she refused to leave. She called my phone number within an hour at about 11 p.m. and started yelling about the sheriff running her off, and I just hung up on her and I unplugged my phone for the night. I got up at about 4 a.m. that morning and I plugged my phone in and found my voice message box full of repeated messages from her about how dare I not answer my phone and have her run off from her house. Yeah, she actually said her house. Later that morning, I called the sheriff again and I requested an officer be there at the house in case she came back and arranged a time for my arrival. On my arrival, a sheriff met me at the house, and it was less than 30 minutes until my entitled Aunt Karen arrived with a carload of her personals and immediately walked up to me and demanded her key. You're not getting a key and you're not living here, no matter what you think. She blew up at this point and started shouting how it was her house and she was going to live there whether I wanted her to or not. I just smiled, closed the door in front of her, and locked it in front of her. She, of course, tried to grab the keys from me, which I simply put in my pocket, and I told her, hey, tell that to the sheriff standing behind you. She screamed, bull crap, you're not keeping me out of my house. I looked past her, and then I said, well, see, what did I tell you? At that, a loud hurrah from behind her, ma'am, you have to leave the property or you will be arrested for trespassing. She turned with a sour look on her face, getting ready to unleash another tirade on whoever was behind her, and instead made a strangled sound and her face went white as a sheet. Ma'am, this man does not want you on his property, and as of now, you're considered trespassing and will be arrested if you refuse to leave and cease harassing this gentleman. Before you go, Auntie, she hates when I call her that, just because you want something does not mean you're going to get it, such as my new house, and if I ever see you on my property again without my permission, I will have you arrested and have your car towed at your expense. If looks could kill, I'd be dead several times over from the glare she was giving me. Better yet, you're not going to be allowed to come here again, and I don't care if you become homeless or how badly you need a place to live. Now, leave before you get arrested and have to pay to get your car back after it's towed. She left, giving me the bird on her way to the car, prompting a sharp rebuke from the sheriff. To this day, she's been going around telling anyone that will listen how I robbed her of her new house and how she's going to get her house back someday. That's going to be a problem for her. Since then, I have improved the property and I sold it for a tidy profit to a really nice but take no crap couple, and I bought a new property with more acreage, about 25 more acres, and no one is telling her I moved. She did try sneaking back onto the property about 3 months after I sold it, and the couple's husband nearly shot her because she came around midnight, I think intending on trying to sneak in through an open window or something. This time, she did spend about 30 days in jail, 100 hours of community service, and 3 years probation plus fees and court costs for trespassing on private property and attempting to enter a private residence without permission. I don't remember what the actual charge was. Her entitlement knew no bounds, and having a gun pointed at her was a harsh but ultimately necessary lesson after learning she was not getting her way with me. From what I'm told, she's calmed down some, but still acts entitled and is actively trying to find out where I live. The first update. Now here's a little insight on why my aunt is so entitled. As far as my memory serves, she's had an entitled attitude since I was a little boy, always demanding and refuses to take no for an answer. Her husband left and divorced her 3 years after their marriage due to her attitude and refused to accept that the house they lived in was not community property. He owned the house before they married and had to be physically removed from the house by the police due to her entitled attitude. When my father died and left me a sizable inheritance, I was an only child, she tried to get her greedy hands on it, claiming it was hers by right, and even tried to sue me, a 9-year-old child at the time, to get it. She went absolutely bat crap when that failed and wound up serving 2 weeks in jail for contempt of court. Then she tried to fake my signature on several documents to get my inheritance. That failed as it was held in a trust by an attorney at the time and lost any claim to it due to the attempt and was removed from getting any inheritance due to the terms of the will. I still don't understand how she managed to try that without facing attempted fraud charges. From that point, she only got worse. When I hit 18, she came to me with papers and demanded I sign them and had a sleazy attorney with her that tried telling me that they would sue and tie up the inheritance for years to come until I signed over the money. They did not count on me having dealt with the attorney for several years and who viewed me as if I were his own son, who told me to sign nothing if anyone tried concerning my inheritance, and she wound up having to pay for her attorney out of pocket and was in debt. Since then, she's been trying to bully family members into getting what she wants and then threatens to sue whenever told no, even when she has no grounds to stand on. It's currently how she got the house that she lives in now, by threatening a family member with a lawsuit if she didn't get the money she wanted. A family member I shared my inheritance with, she bought my entitled aunt a little house in order to shut her down and then blocked her on everything and went no contact with her and got a restraining order on the basis of being constantly harassed and threatened by my aunt. Apparently, she thought she could take my house from me and no one would stop her. So she thought. During this, she had gotten herself banned permanently from several local stores, including the Locals and several other Wally Worlds and several restaurants. Absolutely refuses to apologize to anyone when she's wrong and will never, ever admit that she was in the wrong and is a major gossip. Even after I sold the house, she tried to forcibly move into it. She still tried to get the house, nearly getting herself shot in the process, and now has a criminal record due to it. To this day, she runs around telling people how awful I am for stealing her house and refusing to admit it was and is her house. She's always had that attitude that the world revolves around her and that everyone in it must bow to her wishes, pre-Scrooge revelation and still cold and greedy. Her mother was just as bad, so I can see why she developed such a bad outlook on life. Has absolutely no mercy towards those less fortunate and even says that they need to hurry up and die. It would refuse the so-called surplus population of useless people. And dare I say, idolizes figures like Scrooge from A Christmas Story and has been heard making comments like, "Too bad Hitler lost the war." Overall, she's basically a very evil, entitled woman that hates anyone that does not share her viewpoint and does not bow to her wishes. And as to her seeming obsession with me, I think that comes from my own mistake in allowing her to borrow some money from me after I was 17 and understood what it meant, and later claiming that she never borrowed anything. She never paid me back a penny, and to this day claims I owe her money. Final update. I've recently found out that I no longer have to worry about my entitled aunt, being as she would never, ever admit she was wrong, and, as it turns out, an avid anti-masker as well. She caught and eventually died from complications due to catching the pandemic. Karma caught up to her and kicked her hard in her backside. No one attended her funeral, not one single person from the family, not even her own kids. I had told my entitled aunt that she would die bitter and alone if she kept up with her entitled attitude toward people, and it turns out what I told her was prophetic, to say the least. As I told her, she did indeed pass on bitter and alone. Still, even with all she has done, I still did not wish ill or harm. I simply could never trust her at any one given time. An example of just how bad and bitter she was towards others. When I was 12, she managed to convince my mother to allow her to babysit. Before then, my mother told me to never, ever sign any papers she may try to get me to sign without her being there to first read it. Sure enough, she did indeed try to get me to sign some papers, and I refused due to what my mother told me. She got mad, went full Karen on me, terrifying me, and locked me in her broom closet, threatening to keep me there until I signed those papers. I still refused. She kept me in the closet regardless until my mother came to pick me up. A few days later, that incident and the butt ripping she got from my mother, she tried to present papers to the bank that held my father's money in and claimed that I had signed the papers. The papers were rejected as being obviously a fake signature on them. To this day, I'm still boggled over how she managed to squirm her way out from under that one, but she managed to somehow. And that's only one of the many things that she tried in her lifetime. Another one she pulled was trying to claim my birthday presents so she could return them and get the money from them. At this time, my father was alive and intercepted her as she tried to carry out my presents. He forcefully threw her out of the house, and she actually had the gall to call the police and told them my father had stolen her gifts. In the end, she got herself a hefty fine for wasting police resources and a cease and desist order. Even that didn't stop her antics. Her antics only got worse up until the day she tried to take over my new house, and at that point I was forced to get an order of protection against her. I got it easily due to her record of constant harassments and entitlement. What would you do in this situation if you were OP? Crazy lady. Self-metering flower pot defeats HOA, posted by JMP817. When I was in high school back in the late 90s, one of my teachers shared a story with the class in order to explain why we would have a substitute teacher in the next week. This is by far my favorite story in the vein of malicious compliance. My teacher was in his late 30s, married for only a couple of years, and over the summer he and his wife bought their first house together. As is typical, the house was in a development that had an HOA. While he wasn't necessarily thrilled at the idea of a meddling HOA, it is a necessary and unavoidable evil. He went through their CC&Rs with a fine-tooth comb and decided that while there was some stuff that he wasn't a fan of, overall he could live with it, so they signed the papers and they bought the house. About a week after they move in, they get a non-compliance letter stating that the tree in their front yard was not an approved species and it must be removed. Problem is, the tree was native to that spot, was an estimated 80 to 100 years old, and was a pecan. I mention the type for two reasons. First, a pecan produces nuts, obviously, and that's why the HOA said it can't be in the front yard. After all, a lawnmower flings a rogue pecan through a neighbor's window, and there will be an issue. The second issue is that this was in the Dallas, Texas area. The pecan is the state tree of Texas and, as such, gets a little legal protection. Basically, to cut one down, you need to have a permit. To get that permit, you have to show the tree is diseased or a hazard. Just being in the way is not sufficient. So my teacher is upset as the tree is large, provides lots of shade, and he likes eating pecans. He writes back to the HOA, who turn a deaf ear and point to the CCR and refer him to their legal team for any further questions. He then contacts the county and state, who both come back with he can't remove the tree without a permit or he will face a large fine and/or jail. He copies that letter and he sends it along with his own letter in a certified envelope to the HOA lawyers. The lawyers come back that the CC&R is binding. He is not allowed to have fruit or nut producing trees in his front yard, but ornamental trees of flowers and flower pots, this part is important, are fine. If it isn't removed in 30 days, they will begin fining him. At this point, he gets his own lawyer and it turns it over to him. A couple of months go by, and we are to the part of the story where he is explaining why there will be a substitute. He will be going to court to have a judge weigh in on the matter. The next week comes, and after the court hearing, he comes in and he says that basically he lost, as the judge ruled the CC&R did apply and that the tree had to go. However, since it was a native tree at the time of development, the HOA would be responsible for all cost of removal, not him as the homeowner. Now, most people probably would have just let it go at this point. Sure, you lost a tree, but it isn't costing you anything. Not my teacher, nah. The man decided it was time to protest the overreaching HOA and their absurdity. So, he got to reading. After going through the CC&Rs thoroughly, he took a trip to Home Depot and bought some hose, fittings, and a nicer Kohler toilet. He sat the toilet up in the middle of the yard, right where the tree had been, and he ran the hose and the fittings to his outside faucet so that it was hooked up for water in, not hooked to a sewer. This is the front yard after all. He then dumped some potting soil in the bowl and planted some decorative flowers. It took a few weeks, but the non-compliance letter came in stating that he had house waste in his front yard and it must be removed within 72 hours or he would be fined. He wrote back that there was no house waste. They responded again and he stated they needed to come show him where this supposed waste was. The next day, an HOA guy comes out and points right at the toilet and says it cannot be there, it is an eyesore. My teacher responded, yeah, sorry you feel that way about my self-watering flower pot, but I see nowhere in the CC&Rs that state what style a flower pot is or is not allowed. The HOA guy gets verbally heated and threatens to call the cops, to which my teacher agrees. Having his bluff called, the HOA guy leaves. A week or so goes by, and the class that I am in is pestering our teacher every day for new stories on this. He said he got a letter from their lawyers, which he sent straight to his lawyer. His lawyer agreed with him that the CC&R in no way, shape, or form puts any qualifiers or limitations on flower pots, and as the flowers are clearly visible, it doesn't constitute debris or trash in the yard. A few back and forth things happen between the lawyers, and then the HOA moves for a trial, which gets the same judge as before. The judge reviewed the case and dismissed it as frivolous. He did put in his remarks or decision something along the lines of, while the defendant's choice of a flower pot is eye-raising and it isn't traditional, there's nothing illegal about his use of a commode as art in his yard. The plaintiff has failed to demonstrate any sound reason this would violate any existing rules and bylaws of their association. HOA story time. Clearly this is the perfect time to get to know the new neighbors. About 2 years after my family moved to a smallish university town in a southwestern state of the US, the acreage around our house was sold to developers. The building noise was awful a lot of the time, but we met some great people, the workmen on the various phases, not the real estate developers. Once the first part of the development was finished enough to have neighbors living in them, the house sort of next to and behind our house sold. The new owners were veterinarians. He taught at the university and she had just opened up a practice near our house. They had dogs, who apparently were not allowed into the house after dark. One of those poor dogs was an elderly spaniel who was blind and she would get lost out in the yard. My parents' bedroom is the closest to these neighbors' house. This city has an ordinance about barking dogs, letting your dogs bark all night and so on. And these neighbors also had a brand new HOA that specifically had fines starting at how many times the dog barked in an hour. Who was assigned to count the barks? I never did find out. But these vets let their dogs bark for hours. We asked them nicely to make it stop. Other neighbors would go and ask them to make the dog stop barking, but they just wouldn't. The HOA got onto them. Didn't seem to change anything. Even having the cops stop by and give them a ticket for letting the dogs bark for hours every night didn't stop them either. Mrs. Veterinarian told a cop and some neighbors gathered around that her dogs were angels and were not the ones barking. She would be kept up all night if her dogs were out in the yard barking all night. Clearly it must be someone else's dogs and her poor babies were being picked on. So a few nights later, my mom asked me to make a big batch of muffins. She set up the coffee maker and made up a tray that had everything needed to go have coffee and muffins with the new neighbors. That night, when the dogs started barking, Mom got up to work on some grating. About 2 a.m., Mom started the coffee and poured it into a thermal carafe. She made sure to make the tray look very pretty. And then she carried that tray all the way around to the veterinarian neighbor's house. She knocked on the door and rang the bell until they answered. And then, just as sweet as pie. She said, well, it seemed like the perfect time to really get to know them, since clearly no one in either their house or ours could sleep through their dogs barking all night. After that, their dogs didn't bother us at night. They made sure of it. In the long run, they turned into very nice neighbors, thankfully. Do you think the HOA should have done more to stop this, or do you think that the mom did the right thing? How would have you handled these dogs? I mean, I think dog owners should watch out for the dogs at night. What do you think? HOA passed a stupid decorating rule posted by Jack's Magic Man. Our board was tired of seeing people leave decorations up too long after holidays ended, so they passed a rule last July that we could only have decorations up 15 days prior and must be taken down 15 days after a holiday. Some people might think that that rule is okay, but I like to decorate for Halloween on October 1st to have the decorations up all of October. I don't think that's unreasonable. And I liked having Christmas up, it was a tradition, on the weekend after Thanksgiving. Everyone is out for the holiday, we make a big deal of it, and we take Halloween down the weekend after Halloween, and Christmas came down in the weekend after New Year's. It isn't up all year. When they passed this rule, I was livid. I decided that they never mentioned which holidays we could decorate for, so the first thing that I did was I go out and I buy red, white, and blue lights. I decorated for the 4th of July, and you better believe that I left those annoying lights up until July 19th. Problem is, there really aren't any major holidays from July onto October. But the HOA did not say it had to be a major holiday. After July 19th, I decorated for International Beer Day, which was on August 4th. How do you decorate for that? Well, it was the same red, white, and blue lights up for the 4th of July, but I removed the sign that said Happy Independence Day and then replaced it with a sign that I made myself that read Happy International Beer Day. On August 19th, I changed the sign to Happy National Aviation Day. I kept the same lights up though. Next was Labor Day. Yep, just changed the sign again. On September 19th, I started celebrating Rosh Hashanah, because again, they never indicated which holidays we could decorate for. I removed the Happy Rosh Hashanah on October 1st and changed it to Happy Sukkot. But I went all out for that. I created a booth out of my Halloween casket decorations and put little figures taken from my Halloween decorations into them. I kept this up over the holidays, where I started with Veterans Day after Halloween and then went to Thanksgiving and Hanukkah. The board met March 8th, and they tried to pass a rule saying which holidays we could decorate for, but they couldn't get the vote when they tried to just include New Year's, Valentine's, 4th of July, Halloween, and Christmas. They didn't include any Jewish holidays, and our Jewish neighbors didn't like that. They didn't include any non-Christian holidays like Ramadan, and a lot of people voiced their displeasure with that. So they're going to meet again on April 10th, and I think they're just going to change the rule to make the decorations come down for the holidays in a reasonable time and not put restrictions on when we can start. Now, I can sort of understand not wanting people to leave decorations up all year. You see a house with decorations up in March that were from Christmas time, but limiting when we could put them up is what made me upset, especially since it isn't very fun to have decorations up just 15 days before a holiday. But there had to be a better way to make a rule about it. It's not like it was a problem. Maybe 1 or 2 houses left them up longer than most. But for the most part, you're passing a rule that affects everyone for just 1 or 2 people. The HOA demands that we follow their rules, but we aren't even in the HOA. Click the video on your screen so you don't miss the fallout of this one, and I'll see you there.